Man washed his face and a new day began, the easiest months of Rick's life since the end of the world. A committee was established in the prison, and Rick no longer had to lead everyone to survive or take any responsibility. He put down his gun, wore headphones, listened to music, and helped grow crops in the prison. The number of people in the prison gradually increased, and even the low-key guy like Daryl gained many fans. Beth, the beauty, also accepted a guy named Zach's pursuit, and they are now in love. There were also many children in the prison, because he has experienced all the cruelty of the end times and is no longer a baby. As the number of people increased, the zombies were also gradually attracted, and they had to send people to clean up the fence every day. Of course, the broken gate of the prison was repaired and made even more sturdy than before. Michonne, who went out for 3 days, returned at this time. She searched for Governor's whereabouts outside alone and swore to avenge Andrea. Although she didn't find him, Michonne found a few comic books for Carl and brought a razor for Rick. It was hard to imagine that he used to be a delicate young man. Just as they were talking, Daryl led a group of people and was preparing to go out. He discovered a military base nearby and was now ready to take people to check it out. Michonne, who had just returned, also decided to join them. Half an hour later, Daryl and his team arrived at the base. The zombies inside had already been attracted away, and the disorderly appearance and corpses on the ground indicated that it had probably been overrun for a long time. There was no danger, and everyone relaxed. Zach, a loyal fan, took every opportunity to talk to Daryl. They then decided to go to the store inside to scavenge for useful things. What they didn't know was that the roof of the store had collapsed a passenger plane. This store was relatively quiet, but there were a lot of useful things. Everyone was searching for something. Only the new member named Bob stopped at the place where the red wine was placed. He picked up a bottle of wine from the shelf and thought about putting it in his backpack when no one was looking, but he changed his mind and put it back on the shelf with force. However, the zombies on the roof heard the noise and began to stir. The roof, which had been hit by the plane, began to collapse. Daryl rushed over to check on the situation, and luckily Bob wasn't hurt badly. He just had his leg trapped and could get out by moving the cabinet. But at this moment, the roof began to collapse, and zombies fell directly from above. They were attracted by the commotion and decided to leave as soon as possible to avoid any danger, but the number of falling zombies is increasing, making it impossible for them to rescue Bob. Everyone was busy killing zombies. Bob started to panic because zombies were crawling towards him. Daryl wanted to save him, but the zombies were too many to fight off. He looked up and saw that there was a plane head on the roof, which could fall at any moment. Glenn quickly shot the zombies and covered for Daryl, who dragged away the zombies that were close to Bob. Then Zach helped lift the cabinet, and Bob was finally freed. The roof was collapsing. Just as Zach was retreating, a zombie grabbed his foot and bit down. The others froze at the sight, but it was too late to save him. They had to evacuate immediately. Zach was also engulfed by the rubble. Back in the prison, Carol told stories to the children every day, but her main purpose was not just that. When no one was looking, she took out a row of knives from a box and secretly taught the children how to use them. Those who have seen the previous plot know Carol's true intentions. However, Carl saw what she was doing and Carol told him not to tell anyone, but Carl turned and ran. Night. Beth was writing in her diary when she saw Daryl approaching. She understood what was going on from his look of hesitation. However, she didn't show any sadness and just calmly changed the number on the board. Beth was no longer the cowardly girl who would only cry in her father's arms. She had learned to be strong after going through all of this. Unfortunately, more bad things were happening. In another cell block, a boy was coughing nonstop. He felt very uncomfortable and stumbled towards the bathroom. Hopefully the bath will make him feel better. But then he collapsed. After some time, blood appeared on the ground. The boy opened his eyes again, has turned into a zombie. The rest of the people were still asleep while the zombies had already made their way to the cell block and stopped outside Karen's room. At this moment, a snoring sound attracted the zombie. It crawled through the curtain and bit the man's neck. He died without even making a sound. The others were still sleeping, unaware of the danger that had arrived. As the day gradually grew brighter, they were all busy doing their own things. Rick was busy planting vegetables and taking care of his pig. Suddenly, gunshots rang out, and everyone immediately became nervous. Michonne, who had just left, rushed back. They realized that the sound came from cell block D in the prison. Daryl they quickly rushed in with their weapons, and when they entered, they found that the place was already in chaos, filled with screams and cries. Rick and the others had to rescue them as quickly as possible. Tyrese also rushed in, and luckily his girlfriend was okay. Then they began to search room by room until they cleared out all the zombies. The The man who was bitten knew that his time was running out and he couldn't leave his 2 daughters behind. The children had no mother, and he hoped that Carol could take care of them. Carol nodded and said that she would. Rick and the others also found the first mutated teenager. The problem was that he wasn't bitten or injured. It is a normal death. The new doctor, Caleb, analyzed that it was pleurisy, and the fluid in his lungs choked him to death. His face was covered in blood. There were such cases before the end of the world, which was a type of influenza. The problem now was that the flu might have already spread. The first thing Rick did when he came out was to tell Carl not to get too close to him, but Carl didn't care. He didn't see his dad come out and he was very worried. Rick explained what had happened inside and told them not to get too close to the people from cell block D. Then the committee members sat together to discuss countermeasures. They didn't know how contagious the flu was or what the initial symptoms were. All they could do was quarantine the survivors from cell block D for the time being. At that moment, a coughing sound was heard, and they immediately became nervous. It was Tyrese's girlfriend, Karen. The committee quickly speculated that this might be the flu, and as a precaution, they had to isolate her immediately. Karen understood the importance of the situation and mentioned that someone else in cell block D was also coughing. For now, they had to focus on isolating and observing them. After a while, Daryl and Rick were digging graves when they heard Maggie's anxious voice. The fence is on the verge of being untenable. When they arrived, they saw that the fence had tilted, something that had never happened before, and there was no choice but to eliminate the zombies through the fence. At this moment, Sasha noticed something unusual. There were several dead rats on the ground. Someone intentionally lured the zombies here, which was why so many had gathered. There was no time to think now. The fence is on the verge of being untenable. There were only more and more zombies here, and it was only a matter of time before the fence collapsed. Rick looked at his achievements over the past few months and came up with an idea. He had Daryl drive the car to a nearby group of zombies. The zombies saw them and immediately walked over to them. Rick picked up a baby pig and cut a hole in it, then threw it down. Every time they walked a bit further, he would throw down another one until he threw down the last one. After finishing this, Rick seemed to have lost something. This was the result of him putting down his weapon for the past few months. A depressed Rick was dismantling the pigsty when Carl wanted to comfort him, but he clearly didn't want to talk about it. Rick told Carl that they should all stay away from his sister and let Beth take care of her for some time. Although Carl loved his sister very much, he understood the severity of the situation. He then brought up Carol teaching the children how to use weapons and kill zombies. Rick thought for a moment before saying that he wouldn't stop Carol but also not to tell anyone else. Rick naturally understood that Carol was doing the right thing, but the other parents couldn't understand. The prison has been a bit restless lately. Rick gave Carl a handgun in case of an emergency and took out his holster again. As he touched the familiar gun, he wanted peace, but it seemed that life always had its ups and downs. Rick threw his clothes into the fire pit and looked out at the zombies. The camp had just started to settle down, but now a deadly flu had broken out. Tyrese's girlfriend Karen was showing symptoms of a cough and cold, and they had to isolate her and another patient as a precaution. The next day, Tyrese prepared to surprise Karen with flowers, but when he arrived at the isolation room, it was empty and covered in blood stains that led out into the corridor. Following the trail of blood, Tyrese discovered 2 burnt bodies, one of which had a bracelet he had given Karen on its wrist. He fell straight to the ground. Soon, Rick and the others arrived on the scene. Tyrese shouted his accusations of the viciousness of the murderer, and immediately afterwards he went up to Rick and said that he was a policeman and that he had to find out who had done it and hand them over to him. These words are spoken in an almost commanding tone. Rick wasn't angry and promised to find out and said reassuringly that he had experienced the pain of losing a loved one and knew how Tyrese felt, that he had even lost himself and was in great danger. Seeing Rick like this, Tyrese became even more rude and foul-mouthed. Daryl sees Tyrese in an emotional state and tried to persuade him, but he was pushed against the wall. They understood his feelings and didn't bother with him. Rick tried to console Tyrese again, but to his surprise, Tyrese became enraged and pushed Rick to the side before throwing a punch, followed by a second one. Rick fought back, knocking Tyrese to the ground and kicking him against the wall. Daryl intervened to stop the fight. After calming down, Rick regretted losing control and hurting Tyrese. He had just lost his mind again. The situation in the prison was not good, and the killer was likely trying to prevent the flu from spreading. Unfortunately, Sasha also showed symptoms of a cough and cold. When she went to look for Caleb in cell block A, she found the whole area filled with coughing and even witnessed someone dying from the flu. Caleb came over at this time and said that the whole A block was infected and the flu was spreading. The committee quickly called a meeting, and their top priority was to isolate cell block A. Herschel suggested that the flu virus itself was not deadly, but the symptoms it caused could be fatal. and they needed antibiotics. Daryl mentioned that all the nearby pharmacies had already been looted by survivors. Herschel proposed that they go to the veterinary hospital at the West Peachtree Tech, a place that no one would think to look for medicine. He explained that animal medicine could also be used for humans. Daryl decided to lead a team to search for medicine immediately. Herschel stayed behind to guide the others in the isolation efforts. To make matters worse, more and more people who went to cell block A were getting infected. Even Glenn showed symptoms, and he warned Maggie to stay away from him. The infected individuals had to be transferred to cell block A for isolation. Tyrese decided to follow Daryl to find medicine and asked Carol to look after Sasha, who was also sick. He hoped Carol could take care of his sister and ease his worries. Carol agreed without hesitation, but after Tyrese left, she broke down. Herschel was a highly respected old man. Though he and the children were among those who were susceptible to infection, he insisted on going to cell block A. Despite his daughter's objections, Herschel explained that many people were suffering there, and even though he was just a veterinarian, he could help them reduce their fever and maintain their lives. Otherwise, there may be people who won't be able to hold out until they return with the medicine. Now they had no choice but to save lives. This was enough reason for Herschel to take the risk, and he walked into cell block A. Maggie did not try to stop him and helped Herschel open the door. The team searching for medicine set out in a sports car, hoping to arrive at the veterinary hospital as soon as possible. But while Daryl was distracted listening to the radio, they suddenly encountered a group of zombies. Daryl quickly swerved to avoid hitting the zombies, but as they looked ahead, they gasped in horror. Daryl was forced to bring the car to a halt. Although there were only a dozen or so zombies coming towards them, the scene in the distance was chilling. This was the largest herd of zombies they had ever seen, and the zombies had already started swarming onto the car. They couldn't wait any longer. Daryl stepped on the gas and reversed the car. The zombies behind them were piled up, and the car's rear wheels were lifted off the ground. Unable to move any further, Daryl realized that things were not looking good and decided to abandon the car. He instructed everyone to run towards the woods. Michonne sprang into action immediately, and Daryl followed suit through the sunroof. The swarm of zombies wasn't that large, and they quickly cleared a space for Bob to run out of the car. However, Tyrese remained motionless inside the car, clearly still grieving over his girlfriend's death. Michonne had already broken through to the edge of the forest, with Daryl close behind. Bob fired a couple of shots and shouted at Tyrese to get out of the car. Tyrese came out in a huff, not wanting to run at all, but to take out all his anger with a small hammer. Bob can't control Tyrese either. Tyrese goes on a zombie killing spree. Daryl and the others saw that Tyrese was beyond saving, as he had lost control and was completely surrounded by zombies. They had no choice but to leave him there and flee before they were overrun. As they reached the edge of the forest, some of the zombies caught up to them, and they had to clear them out as they walked. After a few minutes, they finally shook off the zombies. Daryl heard a noise behind him and turned around to see two zombies emerging from the forest. He was about to shoot his arrow when Tyrese stepped forward and killed the zombies from behind. Tyrese on his knees. They immediately came up to help him, and to their surprise, Tyrese was completely unscathed but exhausted. They eventually arrived in a small town and found a car parked outside a house, but it was clear that the battery was dead. Daryl decided to go inside the house to see if they could find a battery, but first, they had to remove the vines covering the doorway. Tyrese started to lose it again, wielding his knife and hacking away at the vines, when a zombie emerged from within the vines. He grabbed it and refused to let go, ignoring their attempts to calm him down. Fortunately, Daryl managed to pull Tyrese away, and Bob quickly took care of the zombie. Daryl soon found a battery inside the house, which was still usable. After a while, they set off again and soon arrived at the veterinary hospital that Herschel had mentioned. They quietly entered the hospital without alerting any zombies, and as expected, they found medical supplies. They quickly split up to search for supplies. Bob saw some good stuff too. After a few minutes, Daryl and the others had collected various antibiotics and intravenous equipment. However, as they were leaving, they were discovered by a group of zombies, blocking them in the middle of the hallway. Tyrese smashed the glass with a fire extinguisher, and they jumped onto the awning to escape. When Bob jumped out, he exerted too much force and nearly flung his backpack off, causing the zombies below to start pulling at it. The others rushed over to help and told him to let go, but Bob wouldn't let go. He pulled the bag up. Daryl heard something rattling inside and opened the backpack, only to find a bottle of alcohol. He was furious that Bob had brought alcohol instead of medicine. Bob was a little embarrassed he didn't say anything. Daryl regretted bringing Bob to the prison, especially since the last time they went out, because he went to get the wine, which ultimately led to the death of Beth's boyfriend. Daryl was about to throw the bottle away, but Bob stopped him. his hand already on his gun. This enraged Daryl even more, and he confronted Bob head-on. Tyrese tried to calm them down, reminding Daryl that Bob had made his choice. Bob explained that he never intended to harm anyone and only brought the alcohol to help him cope with his loneliness at night. In the end, Daryl returned the bottle to Bob and told him,
"You take one sip. Those meds getting our people. I will beat your ass into the ground. You hear me?"
In the previous episode, a sudden flu outbreak occurred among the people in the prison, and Daryl and others went out to search for antibiotics. In the prison, Rick was still investigating the murder of Karen, and as a former police officer, he quickly found a clue. He noticed a handprint near the door which was clearly left by a woman. The answer is already there in mind. Rick confronted Carol and asked her directly if she killed Karen. After a while, Rick absent-mindedly added gasoline to the car and wondered when Carol had become such a terrifying person who would kill others at the first symptom of sickness. Karen was killed by her just for showing symptoms. Rick took Carol out with him under the pretense of searching for supplies. In the car, Carol said that they would have choked to death on the blood and that she helped to free them. She thought they were infected and that killing them would keep everyone else safe. Someone has to step up to the plate and do this. Rick didn't agree with Carol's actions. After half an hour, they arrived at a small town and found a lot of supplies. Just as they were about to leave, Carol couldn't open the car door. Carol looked at Rick with confusion, and he told her that he couldn't let her stay with the group because she had killed Karen. She cannot decide on the lives of others' life and death. That if Tyrese found out, he would kill Carol, and the others wouldn't let her stay either. Even if Daryl and the others didn't come back, people died because of the flu. Rick couldn't let someone like Carol stay with Judith and Carl in the prison. Carol didn't understand why Rick was doing this to her. She stood up for their safety. Rick went on to say that Carol could find another team to start over, find a team that didn't know she had done this, and he was sure Carol could survive out there because she wasn't the timid woman she used to be. Rick helped Carol find a usable car and prepared some supplies for her. Carol left the group. On the way back to the prison, Rick was feeling guilty and conflicted about his decision to banish Carol from the group. He wasn't sure if what he did was right or wrong, considering that they had been through so much together. In the quarantine section of the prison, a man was struggling to breathe due to the flu outbreak. Herschel, in spite of his safety, intubated him with improvised equipment, and with their cooperation, the man was finally able to out of the crisis. Herschel made herbal remedies every day to help delay the symptoms of the flu. However, people were still dying, and Daryl and the others had not returned yet. Glenn pulled out a knife and was ready to give them one last ride, but was stopped by Herschel. Herschel used his car to move the bodies outside before letting Glenn proceed. Outside the fence, the situation was getting worse, with a lack of manpower to help. The number of zombies was increasing. Maggie had to clear out the zombies alone until the sound of a car approaching caught her attention. It was Rick returning to the prison. Rick got out of the car and asked about the situation in the prison, relieved to know that all is well. Maggie asked him where Carol was. Rick told her the truth, and Maggie had a hard time accepting it. But she understood Rick's decision, but it's always a bit insensitive to drive a friend away. Inside the quarantine section, the situation was getting worse, and another person died after being choked by their own blood. Herschel was feeling sad, and the other patients were afraid that they would be next. Herschel asked everyone to return to their cells and locked the door. Sasha brought a cart and helped move the body. Herschel prayed for the deceased and gave him a proper burial. Though he was just a veterinarian, Herschel showed true compassion as a healer. Herschel closed the cells one by one to avoid the patients turning into zombies, and immediately after he saw that Sasha had fallen to the ground, he rushed up to help, not even seeing that a girl had died. But Sasha hadn't vomited blood yet, so she could hold on. It was a blessing among misfortunes. After treatment, Sasha finally woke up too. Glenn found that the previously intubated patient was not breathing and he helped with chest compressions. Glenn had been applying pressure for some time, but the man had not moved at all, and he was getting anxious. Glenn tried to call out to Herschel but could not, probably due to the intense movement. He felt that the blood was blocked in his throat. He then collapsed on the floor. Herschel was still on the ground floor, locking up the cells one by one. Glenn was having difficulty breathing and only the child noticed the situation, and the dead patient has turned into a zombie. The child then shouted urgently for Herschel. The woman on the ground floor who had turned into a zombie came out and jumped on Herschel, who told the others to lock up the cells. A man heard the commotion and came out and was about to shoot, when a girl came out and stopped he, not shooting for fear of accidental injury, but his son turns into a zombie and comes up behind the man, and so they are both bitten by the zombie. Rick's side also heard the gunshots and knew that something must have happened, but he needed people on this side of the fence too. Otherwise the zombies would soon bring the fence down. Rick decides to stay behind to fend off the zombies at the fence, leaving Maggie to go to the quarantine area for support. By now, tragedy had struck in the quarantine area. This child on the first floor, however, is calling out to the zombie, who in this child's eyes is sentient and can understand her, but the child accidentally fell to the ground and the zombie jumped right on top of her. Screaming in terror, Herschel rushes up in time and throws the zombie over the net, after which he sends the child to a room and instructs them, "Don't go outside." Herschel found Glenn, who was now having trouble breathing. Herschel just tried to get a respirator, but the zombies had already started up the stairs. He went to Caleb's room to get his gun but didn't think. Caleb couldn't hold out and turned into a zombie. Herschel had to finish off Caleb first, then got the weapon in his room and the zombie upstairs was hit by Herschel killed. By the time Herschel found Glenn again, he was in a bad way and had to be reassured to hang in there. Herschel thought for a moment that the device he had just intubated would be useful, and when he ran over to get it, he realized he couldn't shoot it at all, or it would break the device. Maggie rushed in, not caring about the infection, and saw her father tangled up with the zombie. Maggie raises her pistol and prepares to shoot. Herschel tells her not to shoot, that the device can save Glenn, but Herschel was clearly running out of steam. Maggie held her breath and shot the zombie in the head. Herschel doesn't dare dawdle and dismantles the device. They work together to insert the tube into Glenn's throat, and even Herschel's hands were shaking. As he had come to think of Glenn as his own son. As the gas was slowly pumped in, Glenn stabilized. Maggie was so relieved. She didn't know what she would do without Glenn. There were also problems with the fence outside. There were too many zombies and Carl came to help his dad fend them off, but they soon find that the tree trunks can't hold them back. Rick had to run away with his son and the two of them soon arrived behind the second fence, where the zombies were also packed in. It was only a matter of time before the zombies came in. Rick took his son and grabbed his rifle, showing him how to use it as he went. Carl has used a pistol before, so it's not too difficult to learn now. Rick told Carl to run if he couldn't beat them and not to let them get close, and as they talked, the zombies had swooped down on the fence and were pouring in like water. Father and son start shooting zombies. Carl was getting the hang of it quickly, and with plenty of ammunition, it was only a matter of time before they were eliminated. 10 minutes later, the horde of zombies had been wiped out. The father and son were already doing the finishing touches to avoid any zombies being left behind. At this moment, a car drove up outside. Rick rushed over and opened the door and it was Daryl and the others who came back. Tyrese got out of the car and immediately asked how his sister was doing, but Rick said he didn't know what was going on inside either. Tyrese had to rush to the isolation area with the medication. Fortunately, when he arrived at the cell, Sasha was only very weak and not yet in danger of dying. With the antibiotics in hand, Herschel and Bob quickly started dispensing them. Bob had been a medic and was just the man to replace Herschel for a while. The next day, all the problems were solved and the patients were slowly recovering. Herschel was finally able to get some air. Now that life is once again quiet, what has their old enemy governor been through these past few months? When governor failed to attack the prison, he got angry and killed the town's fighting force on the way, then drove off with his men. But instead of returning to the town, governor pitched his tent in the middle of nowhere. Governor sits dumbfounded by the fire, looking up as a zombie walks towards him, even tripping in front of him. He doesn't react, still seemingly lost in thought. Or maybe he just want to get it over with. The gun went off and Caesar shook his head helplessly. The next day, governor emerged from his tent. The place was empty. His men knew he was demoralized and had chosen to leave, alone and desolate. Governor then drove his car through the town's gates, but the place was already empty and he set fire to the place, which was his heart's work and was now history. As the months passed, Governor, bearded and in a sorry state, lived a life of wandering and wandering, still without a purpose, walking as if he were the walking dead. When he encountered a zombie, Governor dodged and dodged, not having the strength to kill it. As he walked, he ran out of energy and collapsed on the ground. When he looked up, there was a little girl in front of the window, perhaps remembering his daughter. Governor walked towards the house and came to a woman in the building looking at him defensively with a weapon, but Governor's eyes were always on the little girl. when the sound of a bullet being loaded and another woman looking at him warily with a gun. He raised his hand and then dropped the gun and the luggage on the ground. Seeing that Governor meant no harm, the woman gestured for him to enter the house. They were two sisters, the short-haired Tara and her sister Lily. Governor just offered to let him stay overnight. The sisters asked Governor what his intentions were, but he did not respond in any way. It was only after Tara had uttered a couple of foul words that Governor said he would let him stay overnight. Tara then threatened Governor, telling him that he had better not play any tricks, and accepted him. After a while, the kind Lily brought Governor a dinner and told him that all the bad times would pass. But instead of eating it, Governor turned around and collapsed downstairs and went back to eating his tinned food. As if to see more of the little girl, Governor came into the living room again and the sisters talked to him. Lily was gentle and generous. Tara seemed a little brash, but Governor is always slow and unsmiling. When David wanted to go back to the house to rest, seeing that the two girls were struggling a little, the Governor picked up the old man and headed straight for the room. After putting David down, David began to chat incessantly with Governor about his daughter. Governor was about to leave when David said he had a neighbor who lived above him and had a toy in the house. They had no experience of fighting zombies and he wanted to ask Governor for help. Governor had lived outside and knew how to deal with zombies. This toy might make little girl happy for days. When it came to the little girl, Governor didn't hesitate to go straight to the neighbor's house. The owner of the house was dead in the bathroom and his body was covered in bullet wounds. It looks like Tara is talking tough and doesn't even know that have to hit a zombie in the head to kill it. This family is very grateful to Governor and holds him in high regard. They would never think that Governor had been so ruthless and deranged in the past. Governor went back to his room and took out the photo, looking darkly at the family portrait. He was missing his daughter again. The next day, Governor was ready to leave the area. Before he left, he told Lily that had to hit the zombies in the head to kill them. Seeing Governor on his way out, Lily asks for his help. Her father has terminal lung cancer and only has 2 days worth of oxygen left in the house. So she wants Governor to go to the nursing home and get some for him so he can spend a few more days with his children. When it came to children, Governor's heart softened. He quickly arrived at the retirement home and saw the oxygen tanks. He wanted to take the whole cart with him, but when the zombies heard the commotion and came around, Governor had no choice but to pick up the 2 cans and flee the area. Governor finished and went back to his room. He seemed to need some peace. Lily came in and said thank you, and then helped Governor clean his wounds. Such unfailing care made him feel warm inside, especially when Lily blew on Governor's wounds. Lily said that her child thought that Governor was her father. Her child's name was Megan and 3.5 years ago her father disappeared from the house and Megan saw him in the window and thought he had finally come home. At this point, Megan was calling for her mother. Lily turned to respond to her daughter who was approaching her and despite her talking, her daughter's eyes were always on Governor. Lily saw this and told her daughter that she would go and get the ointment and ask her to look after the uncle. Perhaps she wanted her daughter to interact more with the man she thought was her father. Megan stares blankly at the Governor and asked him several questions, wondering what was wrong with his eyes and whether he had been born with them. Governor was inwardly apprehensive, but replied icily. It wasn't until Megan said,
"Is that bad to ask?"
Only then did the Governor turn his head. He too was worried about hurting the girl, and then said gently that he would tell Megan what happened to his eyes, but she had to swear to keep it a secret. Megan held out her little finger and Governor understood what she meant and held out his little finger and pulled it together. The child made Governor's dead heart swell. Perhaps it was fate. The child thought he was the father, and he came here because he remembered his daughter. From that day on, Governor shaved off his beard and became a real father. He stayed in a place that felt like home and Megan, the little one, stuck to him every day and asked him all the questions in the world. But sadly, David has died and the 2 daughters say goodbye to their father. But then David turns into a zombie and grabs Tara. In the heat of the moment, Governor grabbed the oxygen tank and smashed it down. They rushed up to stop it. Megan screams out in terror. After a while, Governor buried David, and when he came back into the room, Megan hid away from him. She was a bit scared of Governor. Tara, however, spoke up and said that they both understood that this day would come sooner or later, that David might have bitten her, almost bitten her. If he was still alive, he would be grateful to Governor for stopping him from hurting his daughters in time, so neither of them would have minded. Governor glanced at Megan, looking scared in her mother's arms. All Governor could do was turn away and go back to his room, then pick up the picture. Yes, at that moment, he was able to let go of his past and move on. Now Tara and the others can accept the fact that their father is dead. Why can't Governor accept it? Figured it out. He doesn't even hate Michonne anymore. After burning the photos, Governor packed his bags and knocked on the door. When Lily opened the door, Governor said goodbye and turned around to leave. Lily immediately said, They're going with Governor. There must be a safer place. Governor was about to say no, but Lily then said she had seen his picture. Knowing that Governor had a family, Lily knew they couldn't be replaced. But for now, he had to stay with them. It was the only way. Megan needed him. Governor put his backpack down. It was a reason he couldn't refuse. The next day the group set off. They didn't know where they were going. In the car, Tara said she was sorry she had lied to Governor. She wasn't actually a cop. Governor must have been thinking to himself that of course she couldn't be a cop. She couldn't even kill a zombie. Rick had left too much of an impression on him. Soon they are at the river getting ready to spend the night. Megan still stays away from Governor and Lily can only reassure him that it will get better in time. In the evening, Lily and the Governor together. The next day unfortunately the car broke down and they had to walk with their luggage. Just hoping to find a car soon, a bird chirped behind them, scaring Tara so much that she tripped and fell to the ground, even twisting her ankle. Governor didn't care about Tara at this point because he sensed something was wrong. He took one step forward and around the corner he saw a group of zombies coming this way. Governor rushes them to leave their luggage and escape. The two sisters didn't hesitate to drop their belongings and start running. Megan was frozen in fear and didn't respond to her mother's calls. Governor rushed up and called out to Megan to come over. This time, Megan wasn't afraid. She ran straight into his arms, and at that moment, Governor felt an overwhelming sense of satisfaction. The only way they could get rid of the zombies was to run towards the woods. After running for who knows how long, while crossing the grass, Governor falls into a trap with his kids and Megan screams "Dad" because there are some zombies inside. The Governor rushed up to protect Megan and there was a burst of gunfire from above and he was finally able to kill the zombies in a bloody way. Governor came over to comfort the frightened Megan and they hugged each other tightly and Megan finally felt the protection of her dad. Just then, the voice of a man speaks from above. And it is Caesar, one of his former men. In the last episode, Governor accidentally fell into a trap and was rescued by Caesar, one of his former men. Caesar asks Governor if he's been wandering all this time, and Governor nods his head. Caesar looked at Governor with surprise. He seemed to have changed a lot, and then said that their camp was only half a mile away, and that if he went back with them, he had to abide by two things. Firstly, Caesar was in charge of the camp and secondly, no one was allowed to be a burden. Everyone had to comply and either contribute or be driven away. And so Governor joined Caesar's team. Governor wanted to find a better place for the children, but Lily thought it would be good and she was a nurse who could help a lot of people. From then on they would always call on Governor when they went out on a mission to find supplies. One day they found a house, and not knowing what was inside, no one dared to go in. Caesar sent Governor straight away to scout the way. Governor didn't say no. He had to do this job to stay. After entering the room, while others were panicking and struggling to deal with the zombies, only the Governor remained unusually calm and took care of all the zombies. Even Caesar exclaimed that Governor had become a different person and he was satisfied that Governor had the sense to be a henchman. This camp seems to be having a good time. On this day, Caesar and Lily and their family were having dinner together. Everyone was laughing and joking. Only Governor felt a little awkward. Lily felt safe coming to this camp. Caesar, on the other hand, is always talking about life in the old town. Intentionally or unintentionally, Governor had to find an excuse not to talk about it, and a few minutes after everyone had finished eating, Megan said to Governor that the roof was leaking again. It was fine, but Caesar told Governor to fix it with a direct order. A little later, Caesar found Governor again and took him to the roof of a car to play golf. But of course, his intention was to get Governor to pass him a drink. Governor is a character who can be happy and angry no matter what he does, and seems to take to the role of the little brother quite smoothly. Caesar was very happy with Governor's performance. After all, he used to do this work for him. Caesar even told Governor that if he behaved well they might share the power, and it was his actions that got him killed. The familiar Governor came back. Caesar was still too young, and the next thing he knew he was being kicked down. Governor then dragged Caesar into the trap with him, saying that Caesar had forced him to do it. And finally Caesar was mercilessly thrown in. The next day, Mitch says they found Caesar's remains in the pit this morning, and the residents explode. Mitch goes on to say that it seems Caesar was playing golf and had been drinking heavily when he fell into the pit. Tara is also straightforward in asking what to do with the camp. Pete came forward and said he would take over from now on. The crowd explodes and everyone agrees that they should vote on it, and there is a lot of fuss between the two sides. Pete shouted at them to calm them down. He was a soft-hearted man himself, and when he saw the opposition he said straight away they needed to stick together. The current arrangements were all temporary. They would have an election in a few days. For now it was business as usual. Only then did the crowd have nothing to say. The governor also watched all this quietly. By mid-afternoon, Governor had followed Pete and the others out in search of supplies when Mitch waved at them. Having made a new discovery, it turned out to be another group of survivors, less than 10 in number, but with plenty of supplies. Pete thinks they should be allowed to join the group. Mitch is brutal and thinks they don't have enough food and should just kill them and take their supplies. Governor didn't say anything. Pete finally insisted that no one should be hurt and they could find supplies. This time, the operation was called off and the governor was left thinking. After a while, the only thing they got was an owl. Mitch chattered away, taunting. When they arrived at the camp again, it had been destroyed, not by zombies but by man, and the supplies were naturally all gone. Mitch was cursing. He could have had the supplies, but now they had been given to someone else. While Mitch was searching, an old man was still alive and Mitch pulled out his knife and killed him despite Pete's advice. This is where the difference in human nature comes into play. Governor remained aloof and watched the proceedings. It was clear to him that Mitch was more to his liking. Back at the camp, Governor started packing straight away and told Lily that it wasn't safe here and they had to leave. Lily doesn't understand, but Governor tells her to trust him. Something big is going to happen here sooner or later. Governor thinks that if Pete is the boss, he will one day bury the team because he is indecisive. At night, while everyone was asleep, Governor drove off with a few people, but before they could get very far, Governor stopped the car because there were countless zombies stuck in the mud ahead of them, making the road impassable. They had no choice but to go back to the camp, and since they couldn't leave, Governor had to do something else. Governor comes to Pete's caravan and says he wants to talk to him about something. And then tragedy strikes. Immediately afterwards, Governor knocked on Mitch's room again. Mitch opened the door and froze. Governor had a pistol pointed at him. Wind came in. Governor didn't kill Mitch immediately, and Mitch thought that because he had killed the old man yesterday, Governor was going to come and kill him. What Mitch didn't expect was for the governor to tell him that he was right yesterday, that they should take the supplies, that he didn't care that he killed the old man, that people like his brother always insist on doing the right thing, not even caring about their safety. Governor said he would take over the camp and he would do everything he could to protect it, and if Mitch joined him, Governor promised he could do whatever he wanted without worrying about whether he was doing the right thing or the wrong thing. As long as it was for the camp, they would do anything. Eventually Mitch accepted Governor's offer and would tell everyone that his brother had died while searching for supplies and that Pete's body had been dumped in the lake. The next day Governor managed to take over the camp. He was a kingpin of a man and soon had the camp in order, and everyone was very impressed with him. Governor told them that the people outside were dangerous and to avoid them and report back if they came across them. One day Megan was playing hide and seek when she came across a zombie and screamed. The governor heard the screams and he was in a panic. Megan gets under the car to avoid the zombies. Tara frantically ran over and grabbed the zombie's leg, but her strength was limited. It was only when Governor arrived in time that the tragedy was prevented. Not only was the child frightened, but Tara was too frightened to return to her senses. It was this incident that made Governor realize that the camp now needed a regular safe ground. Immediately afterwards, Governor drove to an old haunt, and as he slowly moved deeper, he saw Rick and his son by the fence. He then pulled out his pistol and thought about it again, but did not choose to shoot. This time has made him let go of his hatred, and all he wants to do now is protect Megan and the others. The reason for coming to the prison was no longer a personal vendetta. This time Governor wanted to take over the prison and give Megan a place to grow up in peace. Soon after, Governor sees Michonne, the person he hated the most. Michonne and Herschel had just finished with the zombie corpses and were about to return to the prison when Governor caught them. Governor calls on the camp to attack the prison. At first the residents were disgusted. Governor claimed that most of the people living in the prison were thieves and murderers who had blinded him and burned down his town. And at his instigation, they agreed to attack. Immediately afterwards the governor arrives at car where Michonne and Herschel are being held by him. Herschel does not understand what he is up to. The governor straightforwardly told Michonne that he had come to terms with what happened to his daughter, and that she was indeed dead. He didn't want to harm anyone anymore. He just wants the prison. He has to make sure his team survives. Herschel offered to survive together, but Governor said that he and Rick Michonne could never live together. And so it is. With that, Governor was ready to go, settling Lily and Megan next to the river, where the zombies couldn't cross and it should be safe. Governor gives Megan a hug before he leaves. He's going to take down the prison and live a stable life. On the other side of the prison, Glenn is getting better and Maggie is finally relieved. Daryl is also very angry with Rick for getting rid of Carol, but there is no point in arguing now. Carol is gone. The hard part now is to tell Tyrese. Rick and Daryl came to the passage ready to confess the matter. Before they could say anything, Tyrese said with some urgency that he had found something. As they approached, they were also shocked by the sight of someone dissecting a rabbit in the area. Tyrese thinks there's a pervert in the team, who was feeding the zombies with rats at the fence earlier. Is probably the one who killed his girlfriend. Rick naturally knew that the killer was Carol, and apparently it wasn't a man who dissected the rabbit, and he was just about to tell the truth when an explosion came. Those who heard the noise quickly ran out of the prison and came to the door to see that it was Governor who had arrived with a team and even brought a tank. The governor shouted for Rick to come out and negotiate. Rick also responded by telling Governor that he was not in charge of the prison now and that the committee ran the place. Governor didn't care about that and took the hostages out. Maggie and Beth were very worried when they saw their father being arrested. Rick has no choice but to walk out of the prison and negotiate. Daryl told the crowd that they couldn't handle that many people and that if they fired, as they had done in the previous contingency, they would have to get on a bus and escape. The governor directly told Rick that before sunset, everyone from the prison had to leave, or else the hostages would die. Rick pleaded that they had children, old people and some sick people who would not survive outside. Governor said that he was being merciful by not killing them. While the negotiations were in a frenzy, Daryl started handing out weapons and was ready to fight. The kids from the prison pack up and get ready for the bus. Taking Judith with them, Molly comes after them to stop them, suggesting that they should take their pistols as a defense. Rick's side of the negotiation is at a standstill, and even when he offers to live together, he is rebuffed by the governor. Governor is furious and puts a knife to Herschel's neck. Rick said helplessly to Governor's men that this was what they wanted, that he had been a rival to Governor and had even taken in his former companions. They are also involved in their management. If they put down their guns and came in through that door, they were their counselors. And after these men heard Rick's words, somewhat shaken, the prison men did not seem to be what the governor said they were. Governor also listened to Rick's words and caught up and thought also moved the knife slowly away. But immediately afterwards, the sudden turn of events was so overwhelming that especially Maggie and Beth. A big fight broke out and the two sides exchanged fire. Rick was hit in the thigh as he dodged. Herschel was still alive and lingering on the ground when the governor found him again and cut off his head. Michonne was quick to look for a chance to break free from the ropes. Tara is scared and hides behind the car. She is just a student at the police academy and has never seen anything like this. Governor had just killed Herschel when he looked up and saw Lily standing in front of him holding Megan. Megan is playing by the river, meets a zombie and tragedy strikes. Governor picks up Megan with no expression on his face and decisively pulls out his pistol. Governor is now even more unconcerned, ordered his men to kill them all. The tank crashed straight through the guardrail, his men following behind it. The tank shells are destroying the buildings. The firepower is too much and they now have to get on the bus and leave. Maggie has to go and get Glenn out and she tells Beth to wait for them on the bus. Soon Maggie arrives at the prison to find Glenn, and when they arrive at the bus, they realize that Beth is not there. The woman told Maggie that Beth had gone back to look for her and that she couldn't have left her sister behind. After settling Glenn down, Maggie ran out. Rick, who was hiding in the grass, also pounced on Governor and just landed 2 punches. He was soon pinned to the ground by Governor's reaction because of his injuries. Don't know how many punches were thrown by Governor, but Rick was already a bloody mess. Governor was about to strangle Rick when the long knife pierced his chest. Michonne is here. She picked Rick up and then turned to look at Governor, who was moaning on the ground. She had intended to deliver the final blow, but thought that would have been too cheap. Lily is devastated by the loss of her daughter, and it's all because of this man. Go back. Maggie meets Sasha and the others, but by the time they look up, the bus has already left and the zombies are gathering around them. They couldn't care less about anything else. They had to escape now. Tyrese was relieved to see his sister leave and was ready to start retreating, but there was too much fire from the opposite side and he had to lie down in the flower pond. See that they were getting closer and closer, and it was Tyrese's time to die. Another shot rang out, and it was the 2 children who fired. Molly fired again, killing the woman. Woman didn't expect to be killed by a child. The zombies have poured in and the rescued Tyrese rushes off with the sisters. Daryl kills invaders and deals with zombies at the same. Getting close to the tank, he throws a grenade into it. Mitch runs out in fear. He lost his tank just like that. When Mitch stood up, Daryl had his bow and arrow pointed at him. No mercy for those who destroyed their home. At this point, Beth, who hadn't found her sister, came running over. There is no time to go back to the others now, and they left the place. Only Rick came to the prison again. Fortunately, Carl is fine, and father and son hugged each other tightly. When Rick and Carl finally found the baby crib, It was empty. Rick was devastated to find out that his daughter was gone and could only hope that someone had taken her with them. Father and son eventually left the prison, and so their home was destroyed and the team scattered. The handsome boy is walking ahead on the road, while a wounded father shouted for him to slow down. They were Rick and Carl, the father and son who had just escaped from prison. Carl impatiently listened to his father's nagging, feeling that Rick was mainly responsible for the destruction of the prison. Rick noticed the look in his son's eyes and stopped speaking. The father and son searched for supplies along the way and soon arrived at a house where they took temporary refuge. The rebellious Carl kept arguing with Rick, leaving him helpless. Rick went to the bathroom and endured the pain as he removed a bullet. The next day, Carl woke up from his sleep only to find his usually early-rising father still lying motionless. He felt a bit worried but pretended not to care. It wasn't until noon that Rick remained immobile. That's when Carl approached and shouted at him a couple of times, even giving him a kick. Now Carl started to feel anxious and placed a towel on his father's forehead. At that moment, he heard a noise from the door outside. When he looked through a side door, he discovered two zombies banging against it. Carl remembered his father's instructions to lure the zombies away to another location in such situations. Carl arrived at a forest, but unexpectedly, another zombie appeared behind him. Carl was quickly pushed down by 3 zombies and in the end, he managed to kill the zombies using his handgun. It took great effort for him to crawl out from under the zombies. Back in the room, Carl noticed that his father was still lying motionless. He spoke to himself about what had just happened, proudly mentioning that he had killed 3 zombies. He expressed his thoughts, rebelliously believing that Rick had failed to continue leading the group and instead focused on farming, which ultimately led to the downfall of the prison. He even thought that Rick could no longer protect him and his sister, and that he could survive on his own. One of the loneliest things for parents in the world is when they are no longer their child's hero. Carl sat on the ground and cried for a while before pouring out the supplies he had found on the floor. He decided to venture out again to find more resources, determined to prove that he could survive on his own. Soon, he approached a house and stood in front of the door, imitating the mannerisms of adults as he crashed into it. However, it didn't go as smoothly as he had imagined. Observing his father before, they seemed to handle such situations effortlessly. Eventually, Carl managed to pry open the door and entered. Fortunately, there was plenty of food inside, but as he climbed to the second floor, he encountered a zombie and nearly got bitten. In the end, he had to discard one of his shoes to escape. Carl sat on the rooftop, eating his food. With one shoe missing, he looked somewhat disheveled. Maybe the adult world isn't so easy after all. In the middle of the night, Carl was suddenly startled awake. He looked towards his father and noticed Rick's hand twitching. Frightened, he quickly moved back and even took out his own handgun. Rick rolled off the bed and reached out towards Carl. Overwhelmed with fear, Carl choked back tears. His father had turned into a zombie. The thought of having sent his mother away and now potentially his father was unbearable for Carl. He dropped his gun and said he really can't do it. Say he's wrong. He gave up the resistance. Living alone seemed meaningless. However, at that moment, Rick's hoarse voice called out Carl's name, urging him not to go outside and to stay safe. Then he collapsed again. Carl approached, holding his father's head, and softly said he was afraid that his father would really leave him. The next day, Rick regained his strength. This time, he didn't blame Carl. He praised him for finding so much food and acknowledged his efforts. Unbeknownst to them, Michonne had been following their trail since she left the prison. They had always missed each other by chance until Michonne spotted the can on the ground. She looked towards the nearby building and approached the door cautiously. Peering through the glass, she saw Rick and his son, alive and well. Michonne cries tears of joy. After 2 days of searching, she had finally found them. Upon hearing a knock on the door, Rick and Carl became alert. Rick glanced through the peephole and started laughing. The hardest part is Tyrese, who not only holds Judith, who is always ready to cry, but also has 2 girls, Lizzie and Mika. They were the same children entrusted to Carol back then. That night, they took rest in the woods. Lizzie has some special interests. When she saw 2 small rabbits in a tree hollow, she took out her little knife, and her expression gradually turned sinister. The next day, Tyrese continued to lead them in search of a safe place. Suddenly, they heard cries for help in the distance. Tyrese quickly handed the baby to Lizzie and told them to stay back to back while he went to investigate. He warned the children that if they encountered zombies, they should run in the direction he went. Only shooting is a last resort. When Tyrese arrived at the source of the cries, he found several strangers being attacked by zombies. Despite his efforts to help, these people couldn't escape their fate. Meanwhile, in the forest, the 2 sisters stood obediently in place, While Judith began to cry, Lizzie immediately covered her mouth, not just to silence her, but also with a strange sense of pleasure. Judith was finding it difficult to breathe, and Mika, facing away, remained unaware. At that moment, 2 zombies emerged from the forest, drawing closer with each step. Lizzie continued to coldly cover the child's mouth, enjoying herself. With no other option, Mika picked up the handgun. Hearing the gunshot, Tyrese sensed something was wrong. Seeing the zombies slowly approaching, Mika was directly scared and a little confused. Just as Tyrese dispatched one zombie, he heard Mika shouting his name. Tyrese turned around and saw the 2 sisters standing there unharmed. Behind them was Carol, which filled him with excitement. However, Carol seemed slightly panicked, thinking he might have found out that she killed his girlfriend, but instead, she was met with a hug from Tyrese. One of the group Tyrese helped is still alive, but has been bitten by a zombie. He informed that if they the railway tracks to the end, they would find a safe haven for survivors. They followed the railway tracks as instructed, not knowing how long they walked until they came across a map. It indicated a final destination, promising a secure place for survivors. Meanwhile, Daryl and Beth were also on the run, with Beth firmly believing that the others were still alive. She urged Daryl to stay positive and optimistic, knowing his tracking skills would lead them to the rest of the group. The next day, Daryl began tracking footprints in the woods. Although he believed it would be unlikely to find the others alive, he couldn't resist Beth's stubbornness. He didn't notice that there were 2 dissected bunnies in the trunk of the tree, clearly indicating the presence of someone who performed such acts in the prison. It was Lizzie, the one who fed rats to zombies. Eventually, the 2 of them reached the edge of the railway tracks. As soon as came out, saw the scene, there was even a small shoe on the ground, which made Beth burst into tears, thinking that the children had been killed. Daryl, being a straightforward person, didn't show any emotions, but after taking a few steps, he turned back. Maggie, Sasha, and Bob were also on the run together. Maggie's greatest concern was Glenn and Beth. After walking along the road for a long time, they finally spotted the bus. They run over, only to find that the people inside had turned into zombies. Maggie's heart sank, assuming that Glenn had met the same fate. However, she refused to give up hope and insisted on seeing it with her own eyes. Sasha had no choice but to help her by dealing with one zombie at a time. Maggie breathes a sigh of relief with every kill. Until the end, all the zombies were lying on the ground. Sasha and Bob also felt sorrow for these people. Maggie looked at the bodies, but Glenn was nowhere to be found. A glimmer of hope rose in her heart once again. Meanwhile, Glenn woke up inside the prison, surrounded by hordes of zombies. He looked around in confusion, wonder how Maggie is doing. He made his way to the cells. Grabbing his previous gear, Herschel's words echoed in his mind, urging him to hold on to hope. He firmly believed that Maggie was still alive and that he had to find her. Breaking through the zombie horde, he unexpectedly encountered a survivor. It was Tara. He stopped when he wanted to leave straight away. Glenn changed his mind. Tara was feeling despondent at that moment. It was all a scam by the governor. With Glenn's encouragement, she agreed to escape together. The two cooperated with each other and managed to escape from the prison. They made their way to the highway, where they encountered several approaching zombies. Glenn could have easily dealt with them, but weakened from his recent illness, he collapsed unconscious. Tara is also a bit anxious, facing an oncoming zombie herself. It was her first time killing one up close, and she vented her anger. However, their actions caught the attention of 3 individuals. In the previous episode, it was mentioned that Glenn was physically weak and had fallen into a coma. However, he encountered a trio of scientists who were escorting him. The man on the far left introduced himself as Eugene, claiming to have the ability to eradicate the zombie virus. They took Tara and Glenn with them as they continued their journey towards Washington. 3 hours later, Glenn regained consciousness and learned that they were now far away from their original location. He became immediately overwhelmed with emotions and smashed the glass, demanding the car to stop. He only wanted to go back and find his wife. The man beside him, Abraham, kept persuading him to stay and complete their mission together. This man was accompanied by the attractive Rosita, who was also part of the escort team for the scientist Eugene. Heading to Washington, Eugene possessed the knowledge to save humanity from the crisis, and Abraham hoped Glenn would set aside his personal feelings and work together for the future of mankind. However, Glenn didn't share the same sentiment. He solely wanted to find his wife. Abraham is still undeterred, repeatedly mentioning that Glenn's loved one was already dead. Upon hearing this, Glenn halted and put down his backpack. With a single punch, he struck Abraham, and the two engaged in a physical altercation. No one else could stop them. Meanwhile, Eugene, bored, watched the whole scene unfold. At this moment, some zombies emerged from the forest. Eugene, lacking any combat skills, could only retrieve a rifle from the car. The zombies approached closer, and upon hearing the gunshot, Abraham finally realized that Eugene had never used a gun before. The recoil was so strong that Eugene had no idea where the bullet went. Abraham rushed over to rescue Eugene, and the others also took out their weapons to kill the zombies. A few minutes later, all the zombies were dealt with, but unfortunately, the fuel tank was punctured by Eugene's actions. Glenn bid them farewell once again, as he had to return the same way to search for the bus. Tara, without hesitation, followed him, and it must be said that Glenn had quite the charm. Even Rosita followed suit. Rosita didn't possess the patriotism and ideals of Abraham. She just about surviving in a group. Eugene watched them as they went further away, suggesting they stick together until they found a vehicle before parting ways. And so, a new team was formed once again. As for Rick's side, their family of 3 lived harmoniously inside the house. Especially the bond between Carl and Michonne was very strong. At noon, Michonne and Carl prepared to venture out for supplies, while Rick stayed to rest. Rick's body hadn't fully recovered. Afterward, he took a shower, changed into a t-shirt and prepared to have a good nap in bed. While Rick was asleep, he heard a commotion, accompanied by the voices of many men. Rick immediately realized that someone had entered the room and they were coming upstairs. He quickly rolled over and hid under the bed, knowing that a dreadful fate awaited him if he were discovered. He also noticed his belongings outside, and he couldn't afford to lose everything over a bottle of water. Soon, the intruder arrived in the room and Rick held his breath. He had given his handgun to Carl, no means to defend himself. The person roamed around the house for a while, then stopped by the bedside. Rick's hands trembled with nervousness, fearing that the man would glance down at him any second. Fortunately, the man was lying in bed, and from their conversation, Rick learned that they would be staying overnight. A few minutes later, another man entered the room to a dispute with the previous man. They fought each other, both vying for the same bed, even beat each other up. The newcomer was eventually knocked to the ground and Rick could now see his face, which made him even more anxious. He prayed that the man wouldn't look his way, but immediately afterwards the man was turned around by a punch, turned his head towards Rick, startling Rick as their eyes met. He was just about to speak when the man strangled him around the neck, and the man strangled him straight into unconsciousness in defense of his sovereignty. The man then lay back on the bed to rest. 10 minutes later, when there was no movement from the bed, Rick surmised that the man had fallen asleep. He slowly crawled out from under the bed. "Don't dare make a sound." Rick stood up and observed the man, but at that moment, he heard shouts coming from downstairs. He quickly darted towards the staircase and hid in the bathroom before anyone entered. However, when he turned around, he found another person in the restroom. Both were taken aback. Rick took the initiative and swiftly strangled the intruder to death, then picked up his submachine gun for self-defense. He quietly slipped out through the window, scaling down from the second floor to the first. Slowly, he made his way to the front door, and just as he reached it, he heard a sound above his head. A man was right above him, but he failed to notice Rick. The man sat leisurely on the railing, showing no intention of leaving anytime soon. To make matters worse, Carl and Michonne happened to return at that moment. Rick had no choice but to take action and kill the man first. However, screams and gunshots erupted from inside the house, indicating that the man he killed had turned into a zombie. Rick didn't hesitate for a moment, shouting at the two to quickly leave. They didn't know where to go, so they decided to follow the railway tracks. During their journey, they came across a message: the Terminus welcomes all survivors and provides maps. They started towards the finish line. Meanwhile, Daryl and Beth embarked on a journey that resembled an apocalyptic road trip. One was pure-hearted and kind, while the other was a tough, cool guy. It didn't take long for sparks of love to ignite between them. They burned down a house, making gestures of love towards the sky. This is their romance. Unfortunately, one night, while staying in a house, they were unexpectedly swarmed by zombies. Daryl protected Beth inside the house, allowing her to escape. But when Daryl finally made it out, he didn't see Beth anywhere, only her abandoned backpack. A car drove away, leading Daryl to realize that Beth had been taken by a group of people. Daryl ran along the road, running all night. Now he was faced with a three-way intersection, completely unsure which direction to go. Daryl, exhausted and unable to run any further, can only sit on the floor. The love he had just found slipped away from him. Daryl dejected. Just then, a group of people arrived in front of Daryl. The man leading them was about to approach him. Daryl didn't care how many people there were. He threw a punch directly at the man. The old man's name was Joe. and he was the leader of a group called the Claimers. Despite being punched by Daryl, Joe surprisingly admired his strength and spirit. From then on, Daryl, with nowhere else to go, joined their group. Meanwhile, Maggie and the others discovered a sign by the railway tracks, advertising the Terminus. Maggie firmly believed that Glenn would go to the Terminus to find her. Sasha and Bob decided to accompany her. They continued their journey towards the Terminus. Little did they know, Glenn and his group were not far behind them. At that moment, Tara noticed a message up ahead. As she approached and read it, Glenn froze in disbelief. The message read, "Glenn, go to the Terminus. Maggie, Sasha, Bob." Glenn's tears welled up in his eyes. He firmly believed that his wife was still alive. The moment he saw the message, he was finally relieved. His wife was ahead of him, and he ran forward as if he had gone mad. After running for a long time, he finally stopped. Along the way, there were more messages left by Maggie. It seemed impossible to catch up with the others for the time being, as the tunnel ahead appeared to be blocked. Inside was pitch black, and they had no idea what dangers lurked within. Abraham made the decision to part ways at this point. He preferred to take a detour rather than go through the tunnel, as it seemed particularly treacherous. After the separation, Glenn and Tara entered the tunnel. They encountered a collapse inside, with numerous zombies buried beneath the rubble. However, Glenn wasn't about to back down, but he was determined to destroy them. When Glenn climbed onto a mound of dirt and looked ahead, he saw countless more zombies blocking their path. It was unrealistic to think they could get through. Despite the grim situation, Glenn didn't retreat. He repeatedly scanned the zombie horde for any sign of Maggie, hoping she had made it through. He persisted in clearing out the zombies. Meanwhile, Abraham also found a car he could drive. However, Glenn encountered trouble on his end. They attracted the attention of zombies on the other side, and planned to quietly slip away from this side. Unfortunately, as Tara descended from the mound, she slipped and got her leg stuck between some rocks. And no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't free her. Fortunately, the zombies hadn't noticed them yet. Tara urged Glenn to leave her behind and continue on, as both of them would likely die if they stayed. Glenn, however, was unwilling to abandon Tara. He turned around and began killing the zombies, but there were just too many of them. Use a dagger when the bullet is empty. When Glenn turned back, he was surprised to see Maggie and Abraham. It turned out that after finding a vehicle, they had encountered Maggie on the road, and they had come to their rescue in time. The couple was reunited. Glenn then introduced Tara to Maggie, leaving Tara feeling somewhat awkward. She had been attracted to Glenn's charismatic personality, and now meeting his wife felt uncomfortable. Soon, everyone gathered together, and Abraham naturally invited them to join in escorting Eugene. However, others suggested going to the Terminus first. They speculated that the people from the prison might have gone there, and then proceed to Washington. The next day, Daryl walked alongside the group called the Claimers by the railway tracks. Naturally, they noticed the advertisements for the Terminus. Daryl expressed his curiosity about the place, but Joe claimed it was likely a deception. Where is there any sanctuary now? And even if there were, they wouldn't welcome people like them. Daryl asked where they should go instead, and Joe explained that they had been in a house where a man had been hiding. Men killed their brothers and turned into a zombie, and everyone else was bitten to death. Now they were all searching for him. Fortunately, someone had seen what he looked like. Meanwhile, Glenn and the others finally arrived at the Terminus. The words Terminus caught everyone's attention. The place was unguarded and the place seemed peaceful. Everywhere they looked, it looked like it was before the end times. On the door, a sign read, "You're safe here." The group walked into the courtyard, where they finally saw a woman bustling about. They cautiously approached her. The man handed the baby to the girl and instructed her to stay put. He noticed a zombie approaching not far away. Tyrese approached with a hammer, ready to take care of it. Suddenly, the zombie got stuck on the railroad tracks. Just as Tyrese was about to strike, Lizzie stopped him from behind. She earnestly said to Tyrese, "Please don't kill it, it's a living person." Tyrese had long known that Lizzie had some issues with her thinking, but he didn't know how to change that now. In contrast to her sister's cruel and peculiar nature, Lizzie's younger sister, Mika, was very kind. The reason Carol brought Mika out to look for supplies was to persuade her to be ruthless in the post-apocalyptic world, not only to kill zombies, but sometimes to kill to save her life. She knew it was cruel for a child, but the lesson of Sophia was still fresh in her mind. That's why, back at the prison, she secretly taught the children how to use weapons. While they were talking, Mika discovered a safe small house. They all went inside and decided to rest there for 2 days before continuing to their destination. At the entrance of the house, Tyrese and Carol were responsible for scouting if it was safe inside, while Lizzie and Mika waited outside with Judith. Mika, being obedient, took out her gun and was responsible for protecting her sister. Once they entered the house, Lizzie started acting neurotic again. She was worried that Carol would kill the cute zombies inside the house. Mika immediately corrected her sister's mistaken viewpoint. Just as the two of them were arguing, the door behind them unexpectedly opened, and a zombie crawled in. Mika was instantly frightened and stood up, while Lizzie, panting heavily, sat on the ground, unafraid. The sound of the gunshot also attracted Carol and Tyrese. They thought Lizzie had been scared out of her wits, but Lizzie was actually feeling an overwhelming sense of heartache. Why did everyone hate zombies? And why did nobody understand her? Carol knows what this child is thinking but believed that she could guide and enlighten Lizzie with time. In the evening, Carol comforted Lizzie for a while, and her mood improved as a result. Tyrese in a bit of a trance. 2 adults and 3 children. This cozy moment made him feel somewhat unfamiliar. The next day, Carol discovered there was gas on the stove and prepared to boil a pot of hot water. She heard laughter outside and looked over. She immediately lost her composure. Lizzie was actually playing with a zombie. Carol doesn't care what Lizzie thinks now. She drew out her dagger and killed the zombie. Lizzie said sadly that it was just playing with her and wanted to be friends. She thinks they all don't understand, and only she could see the true nature of things. Carol shook her head in helplessness and felt sorrow for the child. After a while, Tyrese took Carol outside to fetch water. Suddenly, he said maybe they didn't need to go to their destination. They could stay here. Tyrese said he understood her and the 3 children. Besides them, he didn't know who else he could trust. Living here felt good to him. Carol felt guilty because she had killed Tyrese's girlfriend and still didn't know how to face him. Unbeknownst to them, Lizzie had run to the railroad tracks and was feeding the zombie with a rat. She felt immensely happy watching the zombie eat with gusto. The group spent another day here. Carol and Tyrese patrolled nearby as usual. When they returned, they were stunned. Lizzie stood there with blood on her hands. They thought something had happened and hurriedly ran up to her. Lizzie held a bloodied knife and had a smile on her face as she said, "Don't worry, Mika will wake up. I didn't hurt her brain." Carol felt a tightness in her chest and then looked at Mika behind her. Lizzie had actually killed her own sister. Lizzie continued to smile, but now her smile had a sinister quality to it. Tyrese couldn't believe what he was witnessing, and Carol wanted to approach and take the knife from her. However, Lizzie pulled out a handgun and told them to wait, saying she would show them something. She insisted that Mika would come back to life. Tyrese whispered to her, urging her to calm down and put the gun down, but Lizzie became even more agitated. Carol knew that she couldn't provoke her and went along with her words, assuring her that they would wait. "Give her the gun first." Carol's voice trembled as she spoke, as she already considered the 2 children as her own. Finally, Lizzie handed over the handgun, but in a more twisted manner. She said that Judith would also change, implying that she planned to transform her as well. Just as they returned, Carol pretended everything was fine and asked Lizzie and Tyrese to go inside and prepare for lunch. Once they were inside, Carol's tears finally fell, and her emotions started to crumble. She was experiencing the loss of a daughter once again, especially since Mika, who was so understanding and well-behaved, now had to give her a ride herself, which made it even harder for her. Soon, the 2 of them were discussing in the room. Tyrese revealed that he had checked Lizzie's room and found a box with live mice inside. He also asked if she was the one who had been feeding the zombies by the prison fence and dissecting rabbits. It became clear that she had been doing all of these things just for amusement. After hearing this, Carol made the decision to leave with Lizzie, as she couldn't risk having Judith stay with her. It was too dangerous. Tyrese didn't want Carol to leave and suggested that they could try to change Lizzie's mindset and make her understand the danger of zombies. However, this time Carol didn't have a change of heart. She expressed with resignation that Lizzie was just that kind of person and couldn't be changed. After a while, Carol left with Lizzie. Lizzie showed no signs of feeling the loss of her sister. Instead, she appeared quite happy. Lizzie sensed that Carol's mood was down, and in a very aggrieved tone, she asked if Carol was mad at her. She wondered if it was because she had pointed the gun at Carol. Lizzie insisted that she only wanted them to wait and immediately apologized. She stood on the side, crying in distress after saying sorry. Carol watched the scene with a lot of pain in her heart. She suddenly realized that this girl was only causing harm to herself and others, without any awareness of her problematic thinking. Helplessly, she took out the gun. Their father had entrusted them to her, but she never expected it to end like this. Tyrese remained silent throughout all of this. This is probably the best outcome. After doing this, Carol walked back with a heavy heart. It was then that she saw a deer. the same deer she had asked Mika to shoot before. However, the kind-hearted child couldn't bring herself to do it. What a sensible child she was. Even when adults were in a bad mood, she would come forward to comfort them. Carol regretted not realizing it earlier. In the evening, Carol was filled with sadness. She handed the gun to Tyrese and confessed that she had killed Karen. Back then, she had to step up to protect the others. Tyrese couldn't believe that the killer was someone he had always trusted. After a few minutes of inner struggle, he chose to forgive. Everyone had their own stance in the eschatology, but he would never forget what had happened. The next day, the two of them left that sorrowful place. They are also heading to the terminal. In unpredictable post-apocalyptic world, there was a shelter called Terminus that was accepting survivors. Rick and his group decided to head there when they heard about it. Along the way, Michonne and Carl got along harmoniously. Much to the delight of Rick as a father, they walk around and stop. It's like a family. In the afternoon, they came across a car on the road and decided to rest inside it for the night, continuing their journey the next day. In the evening, Rick and Michonne had a heart-to-heart conversation by the campfire, imagining the scene when they would finally reach Terminus. Suddenly, there was a disturbance in the nearby woods. Rick and Michonne immediately became alert. Soon enough, Joe and his group found them. They held a deep grudge against Rick, and 5 or 6 people aimed their guns at them. Rick wanted to resist, but he had no chance. The sleazy fat man noticed Carl inside the car. At that moment, Daryl arrived late due to hunting. When he saw the situation, the man the gang has been tracking turns out to be Rick. Just as Joe was about to execute Rick, Daryl intervened and pleaded for their lives, claiming that they were good people. Joe, of course, did not agree to this request. Daryl dropped his weapon and said let them go. Come at he if have any problem. Joe was taken aback and visibly angry. He ordered his men to brutally punish Daryl, and the fat man dragged Carl down, preparing to violate him. Michonne's composure vanished instantly. Rick gritted his teeth and said he did it alone and they had nothing to do with it. But Joe was completely unreasonable. He told Rick that they would beat Daryl to death first and then deal with the woman before handling the boy. Finally, they would kill Rick. That makes them even. The fat man pushes Carl straight to the ground and commits an obscene act. Rick, filled with rage, demanded they let him go. Instead, all he received was intensified abuse and laughter. Bear it any longer, Rick snapped. The shot made him dizzy, and then he turned quickly and punched at Joe. However, his dizziness quickly made him vulnerable, and he was subdued once again. Rick on the floor anxious as hell. Michonne couldn't bear it any longer, but she had no chance to act. Daryl, too, was beaten to a pulp and couldn't fight back. Carl on the ground, struggling helplessly, only able to hear the repulsive laughter from the fat man. Rick is still being played by Joe, who mockingly says can still turn the tables now. Unexpectedly, Rick took aim at Joe's neck and ripped open his veins with one bite. Rick wants to turn into a zombie and eat this old man alive. The turn of events was swift, catching everyone off guard. In the end, only the fatty man remained. He had lost all interest. He had to use Carl as a hostage. Rick draws Joe's dagger. Facing Rick's wrath, the fatty man's pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears. Sounding dry and feeble, Carl was in Michonne's arms listening to the sound of the knife. The first time he had ever seen his father like this. The next day, Daryl handed a towel to Rick to wipe the blood off his face. The two sat together, discussing the recent events. Everyone's spirits were low due to the events of the previous night. Soon, the four of them continued their journey towards the terminus. Michonne took the initiative to console Rick, knowing how much he cared for Carl. During this time, their relationship had been gradually evolving. 3 hours later, they arrived near the terminus, with only half an hour left to reach their destination. However, after experiencing so much, they knew nothing about the other side's intentions. Rick decided not to enter through the main gate but to approach from the forest to gather information first. Soon, they reached the fence, cautiously peering down below, but there were no guards in sight. If they entered this way, their weapons would definitely be confiscated. Rick hid the firearms in a pit and only carried a handgun as a precaution. The four of them quietly climbed over the fence and found themselves in a serene environment. No signs of people were visible, so they cautiously proceeded towards the nearest building to investigate. As soon as they entered, they heard voices coming from a radio broadcast. Daryl peered and discovered several individuals printing maps of the terminus. There was also a woman broadcasting information about the terminus over the radio, hoping that survivors would hear and seek refuge there. It seemed that this place genuinely aimed to help others, which alleviated Rick's suspicions. Rick approached the woman directly and greeted her. The people printing the maps were taken aback by their sudden appearance. Wondering if they had come to rob them, Rick holstered his weapon and explained that they only wanted to have a look around. The man's wariness subsided, and he spoke using their trademark phrase, "Welcome to the end of the line." The man, whose name was Gareth, looked at Rick and said that they seemed to have been wandering around outside for a long time. Rick nodded in response and proceeded to introduce Daryl and the others. Gareth stated that they could accept them but on the condition that they had to place their weapons on the ground. Rick and Daryl exchanged a glance, while Michonne, ever skeptical of others, remained distrustful. When Rick took the lead and dropped his gun, they stopped dawdling. To their surprise, these people merely performed a brief search and returned their weapons as if it was just a simple test. The man then guided them out of the building, and the group surveyed their surroundings with caution. The environment was beautiful, exuding a sense of tranquility and comfort. The woman at the entrance continued to roast meat, and Rick observed as more survivors arrived at the location. Michonne inquired why they welcomed outsiders, and the man smiled, explaining that the more people they had, the stronger they became. That's why they distributed advertisements everywhere. Rick kept his guard up and watched the other residents, but found nothing obvious. Man offered them some of the roasted meat, and as Rick turned his head, he suddenly noticed a chain in the man's pocket. Slowly, he approached and knocked the meat out of the man's hand, swiftly restraining him. Daryl and the others fully trusted Rick and immediately became wary. Rick questioned the man about the pocket watch, as it was the same one he had once given to a survivor. Now, it appeared in the possession of this man. The man remained silent, and guns were pointed at them from all directions. Rick's patience wore thin, and he pressed the man again, demanding to know where the watch came from. The man, frightened, quickly confessed that he took it from a dead person. Rick nodded and in a low voice asked about the bomb suit and the poncho. He had recognized them as belonging to Glenn and Maggie. At that moment, the man called Gareth came here. It seemed he was the leader of this group. Rick straightforwardly asked him where their people were, but Gareth showed no concern for the lives of the hostages and immediately ordered his men to open fire. Bullets from the rooftop continuously blocked their path, intentionally avoiding killing them but forcing them to move in a specific direction. Rick glanced to the side and was startled to see numerous human skeletons. As they passed by several shipping containers, they heard a cry for help came from inside. In the end, their initial plan to escape through the fence was thwarted as a multitude of people already awaited them. The rooftops were also occupied by armed individuals. Gareth spoke again, ordering them to surrender their weapons. "There is no way. Lose weapon and you'll live for now. Resist now and might be killed on the spot." Gareth directly ordered them to enter the shipping containers, even dictating the order in which they should proceed. It doesn't feel good to have your life and death under someone else's control. Rick opened the door and stepped inside. It was pitch black, but several figures emerged from the other end. It was Glenn and the others. Thankfully, they were still alive. Maggie introduced the rest of the group to Rick, although they were both happy to be reunited, but didn't expect to be reunited in this way. Abraham, in a pessimistic tone, lamented their limited time remaining. However, Rick refused to lose hope. They had overcome countless life-threatening challenges together, and there would always be opportunities. The veteran members of the team, as if seeing the Rick they once knew, stared at him with intense, fiery gazes.